The massive holographic display cast blue light across the Coalition Command Center as Intelligence Officer Vextel studied the data streams flowing in from the outer rim of the solar system. For 3 months, his team had been analyzing this strange new species that called themselves humans. Their technology was crude by galactic standards, their ships barely faster than light, and yet something about them made Vextel uncomfortable. "Sir, the latest behavioral analysis is complete," his assistant Krillinox announced, sliding a datapad across the metal table. Vextel picked it up and frowned at the contents. The humans had a military structure that was both familiar and baffling. They trained warriors, deployed them in conflicts, and then did something no other species in the galaxy did. They let them go free. "This retirement concept," Vextel muttered, tapping the screen. "Explain it again." Krillinox pulled up additional files. After a certain period of service, humans transition their warriors to what they call retirement. These individuals leave active military duty and become civilians. They take up farming, teaching, small businesses. Our analysis shows they pose no threat. No threat. Vextel studied the numbers. Nearly 40% of Earth's former military personnel were classified as retired. They just stop being soldiers. Exactly, sir. They become inactive, non-combatants. It's actually quite convenient for our territorial expansion plans. On the third planet from the local star, former Marine Sergeant Deho wiped sweat from his forehead as he checked his rice paddies. The morning sun felt warm on his back, a pleasant change from the harsh environments he had known during his 20-year military career. His hands, still steady and strong despite being 40 years old, carefully examined each plant for signs of disease. The small farm outside Seoul was everything he had dreamed of during those long deployments. Afghanistan, Somalia, the Jupiter mining conflicts, all of that seemed like another lifetime now. His service record listed operations across 3 continents and 2 moons. But Coalition intelligence had marked his file with a simple notation: civilian, no threat assessment required. Deho chuckled as he walked back toward his farmhouse. If only they knew what retirement really meant. 200,000 kilometers above Earth, Commander Park Sojin sat in the cramped control room of Lunar Defense Station Alpha. Her fingers danced across the sensor controls as she monitored the steady stream of data coming from the outer system. For weeks now, Coalition scout ships had been probing their defenses, testing response times, mapping patrol routes. She made notes on her tablet, documenting each contact. The aliens were being careful, professional even. They stayed just outside the formal boundary of human space, never quite crossing the line that would justify military action. But their intentions were clear enough. Park Sojin had seen this pattern before, during the Mars corporate wars. The slow build-up, the careful reconnaissance, the gradual increase in pressure. Someone was planning something big, she transmitted her daily report to Earth Command, flagging the increased alien activity for senior staff attention. The response came back within an hour: maintain current alert status and continue monitoring. Standard procedure for first contact situations. If only it were that simple, she thought. Down in the coastal city of Busan, retired Navy Captain Kim Jun sat on the old wooden pier with his grandson, teaching the boy how to cast a fishing line. The 8-year-old was more interested in the dolphins playing in the distance than in actually catching fish. But Kim Jun didn't mind. These peaceful moments were what made all those years of service worthwhile. His grandson tugged on his sleeve. "Grandfather, why do you have that old radio thing?" Kim Jun glanced at the military communicator clipped to his belt. The device had been silent for 5 years. Ever since his retirement ceremony, he kept it more out of habit than necessity. Old soldiers never quite learn to let go of their gear. "It's just in case someone needs help," he told the boy, ruffling his hair, as if summoned by his words. The communicator suddenly burst to life with an emergency frequency he recognized, but had hoped never to hear again. The carrier tone was unmistakable. Priority 1 alert. All retired personnel. Immediate activation authorized. Kim Chin's peaceful morning disappeared in an instant. His grandson looked up at him with curious eyes, not understanding why grandfather's expression had suddenly become so serious. "We need to go home now," Kim Jen said quietly, already calculating travel times and equipment locations in his head. 300 million kilometers away. Admiral Kethfer reviewed the final invasion plans from his flagship's war room. The human military looked competent enough, but their numbers were surprisingly small for a species that had colonized 4 worlds and dozens of orbital installations. Confirmed target assessment? He asked his tactical officer. Approximately 2 million active military personnel across all branches and locations. The remainder of their trained population is classified as retired civilian. Kethver nodded approvingly. The Coalition's intelligence services were thorough, as always. A species that voluntarily reduced its military capacity was either supremely confident or remarkably naive. Either way, it made the coming territorial acquisition much simpler. After all, how dangerous could a species be when nearly half of their former warriors had chosen to become farmers, teachers, and shopkeepers? The Coalition fleet began moving into attack formation, unaware that they had just made the most catastrophic military miscalculation in galactic history. The plasma cannons lit up the darkness of space like deadly fireworks. Mining Station Omega-7, a small research facility orbiting the asteroid Vesta, had no chance against the Coalition warships that appeared without warning at exactly 3 in the morning, Earth time. Admiral Kethfer watched from the bridge of his flagship as the station's protective domes cracked and shattered under the intense heat of the energy weapons. Inside those domes, 43 miners and 12 security guards died in less than 4 minutes. They had been sleeping when the attack began, never knowing what hit them. "Clean strike, sir," reported his weapons officer. "No survivors detected." Kethver nodded with satisfaction. The attack had been planned perfectly. Mining Station Omega-7 was far enough from Earth to delay any military response, but close enough to send a clear message. The humans would understand that the Coalition was serious about claiming this territory. Human response? Kethver asked his intelligence officer. The junior officer checked his screens carefully. "Minimal, sir. 1 destroyer has changed course and is heading this way. Estimated arrival time is 36 hours. No other military ships are moving toward our position." "Excellent. Deploy screening forces and maintain position. We'll wait for their lone ship and destroy it as well. That should convince them to negotiate." But down on Earth, something very different was happening. The moment Mining Station Omega-7 went silent, emergency communication networks that had been dormant for years suddenly came alive with activity. Messages flashed between continents at light speed, carrying codes and frequencies that only certain people would recognize. In a small mountain cabin outside Seoul, retired Colonel Lee Sung-ho was drinking his morning coffee when his old secure phone rang. The sound made him freeze for a moment. That phone hadn't rung in over 3 years. When he answered, the voice on the other end spoke only 4 words. "The children are gone." That was all he needed to hear. Lee Sang-ho set down his coffee cup and opened the locked drawer in his desk. Inside was a list of names and numbers he had hoped never to use again. But hope was a luxury he could no longer afford. Within 10 minutes, he was making the first of many calls in Tokyo. Former Special Forces operative Choi Min-soo was helping a customer find a rare book about military history when his phone vibrated with a text message. The message contained only numbers, but those numbers meant everything to someone with his background. He politely excused himself, closed his bookstore early, and walked down to the basement. The gun safe in the corner had been sealed for 3 years. Dust covered the electronic lock, and Choi Min-soo had to blow it clean before entering the code. but his fingers remembered the combination perfectly, just like they remembered how to field strip a rifle in complete darkness. Inside the safe were weapons that officially didn't exist, and equipment that had never appeared on any military inventory. Choi Min-soo began pulling out items and checking them systematically. Everything was still in perfect condition. Across the planet, similar scenes were playing out. In New York, a taxi driver named Park Hejin received a coded message and immediately drove to a storage unit in Queens. In London, a restaurant owner called Kim Tae-won closed his kitchen and disappeared into the night. In Sydney, a college professor named Yoon Ari canceled all her classes and boarded the first available flight to nowhere. The Coalition's intelligence network began picking up fragments of human communications. Their translation computers struggled with the strange phrases, "The old guard is coming out. Time to wake the ghosts. No more playing by the rules. Let the wolves off the leash." When these intercepts reached Admiral Kethver, he barely glanced at them. The language seemed like typical human emotion, fear and anger over the attack. Every species reacted this way when first confronted by Coalition power. "Sir," his intelligence officer said nervously, "some of these transmissions are using military encryption. Should we be concerned about additional forces?" Kethver laughed. "Retired means inactive, Lieutenant. Every civilized species in the galaxy follows this principle. These humans are no different. A few old soldiers talking tough doesn't change the fact that they're no longer combat effective." But the Coalition's confidence began to crack when the first patrol ship went missing. The patrol vessel Thunder's Edge had been conducting a routine sweep of the asteroid belt, looking for any hidden human installations. At 1400 hours, it reported normal status. At 1500 hours, it was scheduled to check in again. Instead, there was only silence. "Thunder's Edge, respond," the communications officer called repeatedly. "Thunder's Edge, this is Fleet Command." Nothing. Long-range sensors showed no sign of the patrol ship. No debris field, no distress beacon, no energy signatures indicating a battle. The Thunder's Edge had simply vanished from existence, as if it had never been there at all. "Equipment malfunction?" Kethver asked, though his voice carried less certainty than before. "Unknown, sir?" All systems were functioning normally at last contact. 2 hours later, a second patrol ship disappeared, then a third. Each time, there was no warning, no distress call, no trace left behind. The ships were there one moment and gone the next. Swallowed by the darkness between the stars, Admiral Kethver stared at the tactical display, watching red dots disappear one by one from his formation. For the first time since the attack began, he wondered if the Coalition had made a terrible mistake. Somewhere in the asteroid belt, something was hunting his ships, and whatever it was, it had learned to kill without leaving witnesses. The small electronics repair shop on Mars had been Yoon Hae-jin's quiet retreat from the chaos of military life. For 4 years, she had fixed broken tablets and communication devices for the colonists, enjoying the simple satisfaction of making things work again. Her customers knew her as a friendly woman who never talked much about her past, though some noticed the way she moved with precise military efficiency. When the encrypted message reached her personal communicator, Yoon Hae-jin was soldering a circuit board for a farmer's weather monitor. The message contained only coordinates and a time, but she understood immediately. She set down her tools, locked the shop, and caught the next transport to the coordinates. The old mining warehouse outside New Shanghai looked abandoned from the outside, but inside, it buzzed with activity that would have impressed any military commander. Tactical displays covered the walls, showing real-time positions of Coalition ships throughout the solar system. Communication equipment that officially didn't exist filled tables along one wall, and everywhere, men and women who looked like ordinary civilians worked with the smooth coordination of elite soldiers. Yoon Hae-jin studied the largest display screen, her eyes sharp and focused. The other veterans in the room watched her with respect they had earned through years of shared combat. During her active service, they had called her Iron Phoenix because she could rise from any defeat, stronger than before. "The Coalition thinks they know how we fight," she said to the assembled group, her voice carrying clearly through the warehouse. "They've studied our military doctrine, our rules of engagement, our standard procedures. They expect warning shots before we fire. They expect us to take prisoners when possible. They expect proportional responses to their attacks." Near the back of the room, retired Sergeant Major Kung Du-young raised his prosthetic arm, the metal gleaming under the harsh warehouse lights. He had lost the original arm during the Titan Rebellion, but the artificial replacement was stronger and more precise than flesh and bone. His grim smile was the expression of a man who had been waiting years for this moment. "Good thing we don't work for them anymore," he said, and several other veterans chuckled darkly. The Coalition forces had no idea what they were facing. During active military service, these humans had been bound by rules, regulations, and chains of command. They had fought with honor and followed international law, even when it made victory more difficult. But retirement had changed everything. Unknown to the humans planning in the warehouse, the Coalition had captured a scout during a reconnaissance mission that went wrong. The young Kalahari named Cecile had been trying to map human defensive positions when his stealth ship malfunctioned. Now he sat in a detention cell aboard Admiral Kethver's flagship, listening through the thin walls as Coalition officers discussed their next moves. But Cecil could also hear something else. Transmissions that the Coalition's communication experts were intercepting from the human forces. What he heard in those broken fragments of conversation filled him with growing horror. These humans weren't talking like soldiers. They weren't discussing military doctrine or following standard procedures. Instead, they spoke like predators who had finally been released from their cages. "Target their life support first," one voice said through the static. "Let them suffocate slowly." "No prisoners this time," said another. "They killed civilians. The rules are off." "Use the black weapons," suggested a third voice. "The ones that were never supposed to exist." Cecile pressed his ear closer to the wall, trying to understand what he was hearing. In all his years of military service, he had never encountered anything like this. These humans weren't behaving like any soldiers in the Galactic database. Back in the warehouse, former Captain Park Jae-sung stood up to address the group. His face was a map of scars, earned during 25 years of combat service. Some scars came from enemy weapons, others from friendly fire, and a few from accidents that happened when you pushed military equipment beyond its design limits. The Coalition made one critical error in their intelligence analysis, Park Jae-sung said, calmly. "They assumed that retirement makes us harmless. They think we became civilians, bound by civilian law and civilian morality." He paused, looking around the room at faces that had seen too much combat and survived too many battles. "Retirement doesn't make us harmless," he continued. "It makes us free. Free from taking orders we disagree with. Free from following rules of engagement that protect our enemies. Free from worrying about court-martials and military justice." Yoon Hae-jin nodded approvingly. "When we served actively, we had to consider politics. We had to think about diplomatic consequences. We had to follow orders even when we knew better ways to win." She gestured toward the tactical displays showing Coalition ship positions. "Now we only have to consider results." Around the warehouse, veterans began checking weapons and equipment that had never appeared on any official military inventory. These were tools designed for warfare without rules, created by soldiers who understood that sometimes the only way to protect innocent people was to become something less than innocent themselves. Admiral Kethver would eventually receive Cecile's desperate warnings about what the humans were really planning, but by then, it would be far too late to change course. The retired humans were already moving through space like shadows, carrying death in their hands and 30 years of combat experience in their hearts. The galaxy was about to discover what Earth's warriors could accomplish when finally allowed to fight without restraint. The battle began at exactly 14:32 hours ship time and lasted 17 minutes. When it ended, the Coalition's Third Fleet no longer existed. Admiral Kethfer was reviewing tactical reports on the bridge of his flagship, the Sovereign Dawn, when the first explosion shook the massive vessel. The lights flickered, an emergency. Alarms began screaming throughout the ship. He rushed to the main display screen, expecting to see human destroyers approaching in standard formation. Instead, he saw nothing. "Where are they?" he demanded. "Where are the human ships?" His sensor operator worked frantically at his controls. "Sir, I'm detecting weapon signatures, but no ships. It's like they're firing from empty space." Another explosion rocked the Asterisk Sovereign Dawn Asterisk, this one much closer to the bridge. Through the reinforced windows, Kethfer could see pieces of his own hull spinning away into the darkness. Whatever was hitting them was tearing through their armor like it was made of thin paper. "Emergency transmission to High Command," he ordered. "Tell them the weapons don't match anything in our database. Tell them the third explosion cut off his words forever." Something punched through the bridge armor and kept going, leaving a hole so perfectly round it looked like it had been cut with a laser. The Sovereign Dawn broke apart like a child's toy, its pieces scattering across space. The weapon that killed Admiral Kethfer had been designed by retired weapons specialist Lee Ji-hoon in the basement workshop of his small house outside Busan. For 6 years after his discharge from the military, he had worked on projects that his former commanders would never have approved. Weapons too destructive, too efficient, too terrifying for civilized warfare. But Lee Ji-hoon was no longer bound by the rules of civilized warfare. 300 kilometers away from the dying flagship, former Colonel Oh Suman watched the destruction. From the bridge of her command ship, the vessel looked like an ordinary mining transport, the kind used to haul asteroids between the outer planets. Coalition sensors had detected it hours ago and dismissed it as civilian traffic. That had been their fatal mistake. Hidden inside the mining ship's cargo bays were weapon systems that officially had never been built. The ship's engines were 3 times more powerful than any civilian vessel needed. Its armor was stronger than most military destroyers, and its crew consisted entirely of humans who had spent decades learning how to kill efficiently. "Target their communication arrays next," Oh Suman ordered calmly. "I want them to know they're fighting ghosts." No active military commander would have attempted such a direct assault against a superior force. The risk was too great, the odds too poor. Military doctrine called for careful planning, overwhelming force, and minimal casualties. But Oh Sumin no longer followed military doctrine. She followed results. Around her command ship, other vessels appeared as if materializing from nothing. Stealth technology that had been declared too expensive for military use. Weapons that had been judged too dangerous for deployment. Ships that had been built in secret by veterans who understood that sometimes the best defense was an offense that nobody expected. The Coalition fleet died, ship by ship, torn apart by weapons they couldn't see and tactics they couldn't understand. Emergency beacons floated among the wreckage like fireflies, broadcasting the same message in perfect galactic standard. You started this fight with soldiers. Now you face veterans. On the surface of Titan, retired Marine Major Han Dudgeon led her team through the Coalition ground base with the precision of a surgeon performing an operation. Her team of 12 moved through the facility like shadows, eliminating resistance. Before it could organize, there would be no prisoners taken, no witnesses left alive, no evidence remaining except empty armor scattered across the facility floors. Han Dudgeon had spent 15 years learning how to take prisoners, how to minimize casualties, how to follow the rules of war even when the enemy didn't. But retirement had taught her something more valuable. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for your people is to be completely merciless. To your enemies, the coalition base fell in 43 minutes. When rescue ships arrived 2 days later, they found a facility that looked like it had been swept clean by some invisible force. Personal belongings remained untouched. Equipment was undamaged, but every single coalition soldier had vanished, without a trace. The few coalition survivors from the space battles spoke in whispers when they were finally rescued. They told stories that their commanders initially dismissed as trauma-induced hallucinations, humans who moved like death itself, ships that appeared from empty space and disappeared just as quickly, weapons that killed without sound or flash. But as more reports came in from across the solar system, High Command began to understand the terrible truth. The humans they had dismissed as harmless retirees were something far worse than active soldiers. They were veterans freed from the constraints of military law, unleashed to fight without rules or mercy. In the coalition capital, emergency sessions convened around the clock. Intelligence analysts worked frantically to revise their assessments of human military capability. The data was terrifying. Retirement didn't mean these humans had been deactivated. It meant they had been transformed from soldiers into something the galaxy had never seen before. Warriors with nothing left to lose, and no orders to follow except their own judgment. The coalition had started a war with Earth's military, but somehow they had ended up fighting Earth's ghosts instead. The white flag appeared on Earth's communication networks. Exactly 17 hours after the last coalition warship jumped to hyperspace and fled the solar system. The message was brief and direct. High Commander Thaxel, speaking for the entire Galactic Coalition, formally requested immediate cessation of all hostilities. The transmission included coordinates for a neutral meeting station in the Alpha Centauri system. No weapons, no military escorts. Just representatives from both sides, sitting at a table, trying to understand what had gone so terribly wrong. Former Admiral Beek Insu had been tending his small garden when the call came. At 62 years old, he moved more slowly than he once had, but his mind remained as sharp as the day he commanded the Earth Defense Fleet. When the government asked him to represent humanity in the peace talks, he accepted without hesitation. The neutral station was a small diplomatic facility that had been built for exactly these kinds of meetings. Clean white walls, simple furniture, and translation equipment that could handle a dozen different alien languages. Beek Insu arrived first, dressed in a simple civilian suit that gave no hint of his military background. Behind him sat 2 other retirees. Kim Nayoung had once commanded entire fleets during the Mars Rebellion, coordinating hundreds of ships across millions of kilometers of space. Now she ran a small restaurant in Seoul, famous for its beef soup and quiet atmosphere. Lim Dong-wook's special operations record was still classified even 20 years after his retirement, but the scars on his hands told stories that no government file could contain. High Commander Thaxel entered the meeting room with obvious nervousness. The coalition leader was tall and thin, with the gray skin and large eyes typical of his species. He had commanded military forces across half the galaxy, but something about these 3 quiet humans made him deeply uncomfortable. You wished to discuss terms? Beek Insu asked quietly, his weathered hands folded calmly on the table. The translator worked frantically to convert the human words into galactic standard, but some concepts didn't translate easily. Thaxel studied his notes, trying to understand how his military intelligence could have been so completely wrong. Your retirees, Thaxel said carefully, choosing each word with precision. Our analysis indicated they were civilians, non-combatants. How do they possess full military capability? Beek Insu smiled slightly, the expression of a teacher correcting a student's mistake. Enhanced capability, he corrected. Retirement means we retain our experience while discarding the limitations that govern active forces. Thaxel's translators struggled with the concept. In every other species the Coalition had encountered, retirement meant exactly what it appeared to mean. Warriors became peaceful civilians. Their combat effectiveness reduced to nothing. The idea that humans became more dangerous after leaving military service was impossible to understand. No rules of engagement, Beek-In-Su continued patiently. No proportional response doctrine. No concern for diplomatic consequences. When we served actively, we had to follow orders from politicians who had never held weapons. Now we follow our own judgment. Kim Nayoung stood up from her chair and walked to the large window that showed the stars beyond the station. Her voice was calm, almost conversational, as she explained concepts that were rewriting galactic military theory. When I commanded fleets during active service, I had to consider many things beyond winning battles, she said. Politics, public opinion, international law, the careers of my superiors. Sometimes I had to make decisions that I knew would cost lives, because following orders was more important than saving soldiers. She turned back to face the Coalition delegation. Now I only have to consider results. If someone threatens innocent people, I remove that threat by the most efficient method available. I don't ask permission. I don't file reports. I don't worry about whether my actions might embarrass someone in government. The truth began to settle over High Commander Thaxel like a heavy blanket. The Coalition had not been fighting Earth's military at all. They had been fighting something far more dangerous: veterans, who had earned the right to make their own decisions about life and death. Lim Dongwook spoke for the first time since entering the room. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of decades spent in places that didn't appear on any map. Your intelligence files show our active military forces, he said. Young soldiers who follow orders and worry about courts-martial. But you never studied the old soldiers, the ones who have already proven themselves, the ones who no longer need permission to do what must be done. Thaxel realized with growing horror that humanity's most dangerous warriors weren't their young soldiers still bound by military law and international convention. They were the experienced ones who had been freed from all constraints, except their own conscience. The meeting lasted 6 hours. When it ended, Thaxel transmitted new orders to every Coalition fleet in the galaxy. Avoid all contact with human space under any circumstances. The species that they had dismissed as primitive and manageable had just been reclassified as an extinction-level threat. 3 days later, the Galactic Coalition's xenobiology database received its largest single update in recorded history. Under human military forces, a new classification appeared in bright red text: retired personnel, threat assessment level maximum, species designation upgraded to extinction class, recommendation: avoid all contact, do not engage under any circumstances. Across the galaxy, military academies began teaching new lessons about the humans of Earth. They learned to fear not humanity's armies, but something far more terrifying: their veterans. The old soldiers who had earned the right to fight without rules,